The alarm echoed through the massive halls of the Galactic Cooperative Station. Red lights flashed across the communication center as dozens of alien species worked at their control panels. The distress signal had been repeating for 3 hours now, coming from a small world on the outer rim. Ambassador Zexhai adjusted his breathing apparatus and read the message again. His blue skin turned pale as he understood what the words meant. The Verdani people were dying, and they needed help fast. Zexhai had been working for the Galactic Cooperative for 20 years. He had seen many crises before. Floods, earthquakes, small wars between neighboring planets. This was different. This was extinction. The Verdani lived on Kepler 442b, a peaceful agricultural world covered in green fields and crystal-clear rivers. They were plant-like beings who grew their own food from special crops that had fed their people for thousands of years. Now something was killing those crops and the Verdani were starving. "Sir," said his assistant, a small insect-like creature called Telnik, "the plague is spreading faster than we thought. The Verdani have maybe 6 months before all their food is gone." Zexhai nodded slowly. He had seen the reports. Some kind of disease was attacking the Verdani crops, turning healthy plants into black, twisted things that crumbled to dust. The worst part was that it seemed designed to target their specific food sources. Someone or something had created this plague as a weapon. "Call an emergency meeting," Zexhai said. "We need to discuss aid options immediately." 2 hours later, representatives from 12 different species sat around the curved table in the main council chamber. The room was designed to accommodate everyone, with different gravity fields and atmospheric zones for each delegate. Some breathed water, others needed methane, and a few existed as pure energy. But they all shared one thing: concern for the Verdani people. Zexhai stood at the center podium and activated the holographic display. Images of the dying Verdani world appeared above the table, showing withered fields and empty storage facilities. "Friends," Zexhai began, "we face a humanitarian crisis unlike any we've seen in decades. The Verdani people are dying, and they've asked for our help." The Centauri representative, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, raised one hand. "What kind of aid are we talking about? Food supplies? Medical ships? Standard protocol suggests 2 or 3 vessels," said the Andromedan delegate, her voice coming through a translation device. "1 research ship to study the plague, 1 medical frigate, and perhaps a supply transport with emergency food rations." Other delegates nodded in agreement. This was how the Galactic Cooperative always handled such problems. Send modest help, study the situation, provide basic necessities. It was efficient and cost-effective. "I estimate we'll need about 50 scientists and doctors," added the Vegan representative, "plus maybe 1,000 tons of emergency food supplies. Should cost about 10 million credits total." Zexhai was about to respond when the main doors slid open. Admiral Sarah Chen walked into the chamber, her black uniform crisp and clean. She was the human representative to the Galactic Cooperative, and one of the few humans most aliens had ever met. The room fell quiet. Humans had only joined the Galactic Cooperative 5 years ago, after first contact was made near their home system. Most species still found them strange and unpredictable. They came from what the galaxy classified as a death world, a planet so dangerous that most intelligent life couldn't survive there. Admiral Chen was tall for a human, with short gray hair and sharp brown eyes. She had served in 3 different human wars before taking this diplomatic position. Many aliens found her intimidating, though she was always polite and professional. "Admiral Chen," Zexhai said with a slight bow, "thank you for joining us. We were just discussing aid options for the Verdani crisis." Chen nodded and took her seat at the table. Her chair was designed for human biology, with Earth-normal gravity and atmospheric composition. She listened quietly as the other delegates continued their discussion. "So we're agreed," said the Centauri representative. 3 ships, minimal crew, standard aid package. Should be sufficient to stabilize the situation until the Verdani can find their own solution. The research team will need at least 6 months to study the plague, added the Andromedan. Maybe longer if it's as complex as the reports suggest. And the food supplies should last them 3 months, said the Vegan delegate. That should give them time to find alternative food sources. Zexhai looked around the table. Everyone seemed satisfied with the plan. It was reasonable, affordable, and followed established protocols. He was about to call for a formal vote when Admiral Chen stood up. The room grew quiet again. Chen looked at each delegate in turn, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady. Humanity will handle this. The silence stretched for several seconds. HFY blinked his large eyes, confused by the simple statement. "I'm sorry, Admiral," he said. "Could you clarify what you mean by handle this?" "We'll take care of the Verdani situation," Chen replied. "Don't worry about it." The Centauri representative leaned forward. "Admiral, with respect, this is a galactic cooperative matter. We appreciate Earth's offer to contribute, but we have established protocols for humanitarian aid." Chen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I understand. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. The delegates stared after her, unsure what had just happened. "Admiral Chen," HFY called out. "What about the aid package? The resource allocation? We need to coordinate our response." Chen paused at the doorway and looked back at the assembly. "Like I said, don't worry about it. Humanity will handle this." Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of confused aliens. "Well," said the Andromedan delegate after a moment, "that was strange. Should we continue with our planning?" "I suppose so," HFY replied, though something felt wrong. He had worked with humans before, and they rarely did anything without careful planning and detailed discussions. Admiral Chen's behavior was completely out of character. The meeting continued for another hour as delegates discussed logistics, budgets, and timelines. They decided to send the research vessel Scientific Endeavor, the medical frigate Healing Light, and the supply transport Generous Hand. It was a modest but adequate response to the crisis. What none of them knew was that Admiral Chen had already left the station. Her personal shuttle was racing toward the nearest human outpost, where she would send a priority message to Earth Command. As the shuttle jumped to hyperspace, Chen activated her communication array. The message she sent was brief but clear. Priority Alpha, Category 5 humanitarian crisis on Kepler 442b. Entire species facing extinction from engineered bioweapon. Authorization requested for Operation Lifeline. Recommend full fleet deployment. She closed the channel and leaned back in her chair. The other species meant well, but they thought too small. They saw a problem that needed a modest solution. Humans saw a problem that needed to be solved completely, permanently, and with enough redundancy to prevent it from ever happening again. Chen smiled as she thought about what was about to happen. The Galactic Cooperative was about to learn something new about humans. When they cared about something, they didn't do anything halfway. The Verdani were going to be just fine. Admiral Chen's shuttle docked at Luna Station exactly 18 hours after she left the Galactic Cooperative meeting. The massive orbital facility orbited Earth's moon, serving as the primary military command center for human space operations. As soon as Chen stepped off her ship, she was met by 3 officers in crisp uniforms. "Admiral," said Captain Rodriguez, the station commander, "Earth Command received your message. They want to see you immediately." Chen nodded and followed the officers through the station's corridors. Luna Station buzzed with activity as thousands of personnel worked around the clock. But today felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense of purpose that meant something big was happening. They entered the main command center, a vast room filled with holographic displays and communication terminals. At the center sat Fleet Admiral Harrison, a grizzled veteran with more experience than most aliens had lifespans. He looked up as Chen approached. "Sarah," Harrison said, standing to greet her. "I've read your report. Tell me more about these Verdani people." Chen activated a holographic display showing Kepler 442b. The planet appeared as a green and blue marble, beautiful and peaceful. "They're agricultural specialists, sir. Completely nonviolent. They've been growing the same crops for over 3,000 years. Now something is killing everything they eat. And you think it's a weapon? The plague is too specific, too targeted. Someone designed this to kill Verdani food sources and nothing else. It's biological warfare from an extinct species, probably left over from some ancient conflict." Harrison studied the data, his weathered face grim. "How long do they have?" 6 months, maybe less. Their entire civilization depends on these crops. When the food runs out, they die." The Fleet Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Chen had served under Harrison during the Titan colony crisis, and she knew he was thinking through all the implications. Finally, he looked up at her. "What do you recommend?" Full humanitarian deployment, sir. Operation Lifeline Protocols. We treat this like a Category 5 extinction event. Harrison raised an eyebrow. That's our highest level of response, Sarah. We've only used it twice before, both times for human colonies. With respect, sir, the Verdani are asking for help. We can save them, but only if we act fast and go big. How big are we talking? Chen pulled up another display showing fleet compositions and supply chains. I recommend the 3rd Agricultural Fleet as primary response. They have the terraforming equipment and hydroponic facilities we'll need. Support them with the 7th Research Flotilla for medical and scientific response, plus the 12th Medical Corps for population health management. Harrison studied the numbers. That's over 400 ships, Admiral. Yes, sir. The other species sent 3 ships. Yes, sir. Harrison was quiet again, then a slow smile spread across his face. Do it. Authorization granted for Operation Lifeline. Full deployment. Chen felt a surge of satisfaction. Thank you, sir. I'll coordinate with Fleet Command immediately. One more thing, Sarah, Harrison said as she turned to leave. Make sure our alien friends understand what they're about to see. I don't want them thinking we're invading someone. Within 6 hours, every human shipyard from Earth to Alpha Centauri received priority orders. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Shipyard workers who had been preparing to go home suddenly found themselves working triple shifts. Supply depots that had been quiet for months exploded into activity. At Mars Orbital Shipyard, Supervisor Martinez watched as massive agricultural processors rolled out of construction bays. These ships were designed for terraforming operations, equipped with atmospheric scrubbers, soil processors, and orbital hydroponic farms. Each one could feed 1 million people indefinitely. How many are we sending? Asked his assistant, a young engineer named Kim. 12 agricultural processors plus support vessels, Martinez replied. And that's just from our facility. Europa Station is sending another 15. Kim stared at the massive ships. Sir, that seems like a lot for one planet. Martinez chuckled. Kid, you haven't been doing this long, have you? When humans decide to help someone, we don't mess around. At Europa Station, Dr. James Okafor was assembling the largest scientific response team in human history. As the leading expert on xenobiology and agricultural engineering, he had been chosen to lead the research effort on Kepler 442b. We need specialists in every field, he told his team of department heads. Atmospheric chemistry, soil biology, plant genetics, bioweapon analysis, terraforming, hydroponics, and ecosystem management. How many people are we talking about? Asked Dr. Williams, head of the xenobiology department. 2,000 minimum, plus support staff and equipment. Dr. Williams blinked. James, that's more people than most planets have scientists. The Verdani are facing extinction, Okafor replied simply. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. The research fleet began assembling immediately. Massive laboratory ships, mobile research stations, and specialized analysis vessels joined the convoy. Each ship carried equipment worth more than most planetary governments' entire budgets. Meanwhile, the 12th Medical Corps was preparing their own response. Admiral Chen had requested full medical support, which meant treating the Verdani crisis like a human military operation. Medical ships capable of handling millions of patients, portable hospitals, and enough medical supplies to support a major war effort. Are we expecting casualties? Asked Dr. Patel, the chief medical officer. We're expecting to save lives, replied Medical Admiral Santos. All of them. The 5th Engineering Division received orders to prepare for major infrastructure deployment. Their ships carried everything needed to build orbital platforms, atmospheric processors, and planetary defense systems. The engineers didn't know exactly what they'd be building, but they prepared for everything. 3 days after Admiral Chen's authorization, the human fleet began assembling at the outer edge of the Sol system. Ships arrived in perfect formation, their crews working with practiced efficiency, supply vessels loaded with enough food to feed the Verdani for decades, research ships carrying laboratories that could analyze anything from viruses to star systems, medical vessels equipped to handle any biological crisis imaginable. At the center of it all, the flagship UHSV Abundance prepared for departure. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge, watching as the last ships joined the formation. Her tactical officer, Commander Park, approached with the final numbers. Fleet strength 412 vessels, Admiral. Total personnel 43,000. Estimated supplies Enough food for 10 million Verdani for 50 years, plus terraforming equipment for 3 continental landmasses. Chen nodded. Time to destination? 14 days at maximum hyperspace velocity. Sir. Then let's go save some people. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace in perfect synchronization, leaving behind only empty space and the bewildered sensors of several alien observation posts. Word quickly spread through the Galactic Cooperative that humanity had deployed what appeared to be an invasion fleet. Back on Kepler 442b, the Verdani monitoring station detected the approaching fleet signatures and assumed their equipment was broken. The readings showed hundreds of ships, not the 3 vessels the Galactic Cooperative had promised. Elder Krista, the leader of the Verdani Council, stared at the sensor data in confusion. Are you certain these readings are correct? We've checked them 5 times, Elder, replied the technician. The signatures are definitely human, and there are definitely over 400 of them. Krista felt her leaves trembling with nervousness. The Verdani were a peaceful people who had never seen a military fleet of any size. The idea of hundreds of warships approaching their world was terrifying. Send a message to the Galactic Cooperative, she ordered. Ask them what's happening. But the Galactic Cooperative was just as confused as the Verdani. Ambassador Zexhai had been trying to contact Admiral Chen for 3 days without success. The human response was completely outside normal protocols, and no one knew what to expect. As the human fleet raced through hyperspace toward Kepler 442b, Admiral Chen stood in her ready room, reviewing the mission parameters one final time. The Verdani were going to be saved, but they were also about to experience something no species in the galaxy had ever seen before. The humans were coming to help, and they were bringing everything they had. The Verdani Orbital Defense Coordinator was having a peaceful morning when his entire universe changed. Tekler had been monitoring space traffic around Kepler 442b for 15 years, and the most exciting thing he usually saw was the weekly supply ship from the inner systems. His species didn't have enemies, didn't fight wars, and rarely received visitors. Then his sensors exploded with contact signatures. Computer, run full diagnostic on sensor array, Teklar said, his voice shaking slightly. The readings couldn't be correct. According to his instruments, over 400 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of their system. Diagnostic complete. All systems functioning normally, the computer replied in its calm, synthetic voice. Tekler stared at the display, his plant-like features turning pale green with shock. The ships were arranged in perfect military formation, advancing toward Kepler 442b at steady velocity. At the center of the formation was a massive vessel that dwarfed anything he had ever seen. His communication system chimed with an incoming message. With trembling fingers, Teklar activated the receiver. Verdani Orbital Control, this is Admiral Sarah Chen aboard the UHSV Abundance. We're responding to your distress call, requesting permission to establish orbital platforms for minor agricultural assistance. Teklar blinked several times. Minor agricultural assistance. He looked at his sensors again, counting ship signatures. Whatever the humans considered minor, it involved enough vessels to conquer half the galaxy. Admiral Chen, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. This is Orbital Coordinator Teklar. We were told to expect 3 ships from the Galactic Cooperative. Those are coming too, Chen said cheerfully. We're just the advance team. The real fleet arrives next week. Teklar fainted. 3 hours later, Elder Krista stood in the main council chamber, surrounded by panicked Verdani officials. Outside the windows, they could see lights in the sky as human ships took positions throughout their solar system. The humans had politely requested permission to begin operations, then started anyway when no one responded. Elder, said Science Advisor Paljan, his leaves rustling with anxiety. They're deploying some kind of atmospheric processors. Massive ones. They're also constructing what appears to be orbital farming platforms. How massive? Krista asked. Each platform is roughly the size of our capital city. They've deployed 12 so far. Krista closed her eyes and tried to process what was happening. The Verdani had asked for help with their crop plague, expecting maybe a few scientists and some emergency food supplies. Instead, they had received what looked like the entire human space fleet. Have they made any demands? She asked. No, Elder. They keep asking for permission to help us, very politely. A communication request chimed through the chamber's speakers. Krista accepted the call, and Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main screen. The human looked professional and friendly, which somehow made the situation even more surreal. "Elder Krista," Chen said with a slight bow, "I apologize for any confusion our arrival may have caused. We're here to help with your agricultural crisis." "Admiral," Krista replied carefully, "we appreciate your concern, but this seems like a very large response for a crop plague." Chen looked puzzled. "Large, Elder, this is just the advance team. We wanted to get the basic infrastructure in place before the real help arrives." "The real help?" "The 1st Agricultural Corps is about 2 days behind us. They're bringing the heavy terraforming equipment, plus the 4th Medical Division and the 8th Engineering Battalion should be here by the end of the week." Krista felt her leaves beginning to wilt. "How many ships is that?" "Oh, maybe another 200. Nothing too dramatic." Before Krista could respond, Science Advisor Paljan burst into the chamber, his usually calm demeanor completely gone. "Elder," he said breathlessly, "you need to see this. The humans have landed teams on the 3 dead continents." "Which 3 dead continents?" Krista asked, confused. "All of them. Zareth, Valdris, and Morton. The ones that have been uninhabitable for centuries because of the volcanic activity and toxic atmosphere." Krista turned back to Admiral Chen's image. "Admiral, our people can't survive on those continents." "They're poisonous to us," Chen smiled. "Not anymore. We're cleaning them up. Should have them ready for agriculture in about 6 weeks. Just in case you need backup farming space." "Backup farming space?" "Well, your current continent should be fine once we clear the plague and improve the soil composition. But we always like to have redundancy. Can't be too careful when dealing with food security." "Dr. James." Okafor appeared on the screen next to Admiral Chen. The xenobiologist looked excited as he addressed the Verdani leadership. "Elder Krista," he said, "I've been analyzing the plague affecting your crops. Good news. It's definitely artificial, which means we can counter it. Better news, we've already synthesized a cure. We'll have it ready for planetary deployment within 72 hours. Krista stared at him. "A cure? But our best scientists have been working on this problem for months." "Different approaches," Dr. Okafor explained. "We brought some specialized equipment. Plus, biological weapons are kind of our specialty. We've dealt with worse things on Earth." "What's Earth like?" asked Science Advisor Paljan, genuinely curious despite the chaos. Dr. Okafor and Admiral Chen exchanged glances. "Challenging," Chen said diplomatically. "Everything there tries to kill you. So we got good at solving problems quickly and permanently." The conversation was interrupted by another urgent message from the orbital monitoring station. Teklar, who had recovered from his fainting spell, appeared on screen looking even more confused than before. "Elder," he said, "the humans are asking permission to deploy something called a planetary defense grid. They say it's just a precaution in case whoever created the plague comes back." "A defense grid?" Krista asked. Admiral Chen nodded. "Standard protocol. We always secure the area when we're helping someone. Just a few orbital platforms with early warning sensors and some basic defensive capabilities." "How basic?" Krista asked suspiciously. "Each platform can destroy a Dreadnought-class warship," Chen said casually. "But don't worry, they're completely automated. Your people won't have to operate them." By the end of the first day, the Verdani government had given up trying to understand what was happening and simply watched in amazement. Human ships worked with incredible efficiency, deploying equipment and personnel across their entire solar system. Massive atmospheric processors began scrubbing the dead continents clean. Orbital farms started producing food, while research teams analyzed every square meter of the planet's surface. The most shocking discovery came from Dr. Okafor's medical team. After examining several sick Verdani, they announced that they could not only cure the plague but also improve Verdani biology to make them immune to similar bioweapons in the future. "Is that safe?" Elder Krista asked during the evening briefing. "Completely," Dr. Okafor assured her. "We'll also boost your immune systems and increase your nutritional efficiency. You'll be healthier than you've ever been. While we're at it," added Dr. Williams, the head of agricultural engineering, "we'd like permission to improve your crop yields. We can increase production by about 300% and make your plants more resistant to environmental changes." Krista looked around at her advisors, all of whom appeared to be in various stages of shock. "You want to improve our crops while you're curing the plague?" "Might as well," Dr. Williams said cheerfully. "We're already here and we have the equipment. Shouldn't take more than a few weeks. And you're doing all this for free?" Admiral Chen looked surprised by the question. Of course. You asked for help. That evening, as Krista stood on her balcony looking up at the lights of human ships filling their sky, she received a personal message from Admiral Chen. Elder, Chen said, I wanted to personally assure you that everything we're doing is designed to help your people. I know this seems overwhelming, but we take these situations very seriously. When someone asks humans for help, we make sure the problem gets solved completely. Admiral, Krista replied, may I ask why you're doing so much for us? Most species would send a few ships and some supplies. Chen was quiet for a moment, then smiled. On Earth, we learned that when your neighbors are in trouble, you don't send a care package. You move mountains. Because today it's you who needs help, but tomorrow it might be us, and we'd want someone to move mountains for us too. Krista felt tears forming in her eyes. Thank you, Admiral. Don't thank me yet, Chen said with a grin. Wait until you see what we're building on your outer moon. The engineering team got a little carried away with the emergency shelter designs. Ambassador Zexhai had never felt so confused in his entire diplomatic career. For 3 days he had been trying to understand what was happening in the Kepler 442b system. The reports coming from Verdani space sounded impossible, but they kept arriving from multiple sources. According to the latest intelligence, humans had deployed more ships than most species owned in their entire fleets. They were apparently terraforming 3 continents, building orbital cities and constructing enough defensive platforms to protect a dozen worlds. All of this to help with what the Galactic Cooperative had classified as a minor agricultural crisis. Sir, said his assistant Telnik, scurrying into the office with another datapad, we just received a formal complaint from the Rigelian Trade Federation. They're saying human activities in the Kepler system are disrupting normal shipping routes. How are they disrupting shipping? Zexhai asked wearily. Apparently there are so many human ships that normal traffic can't navigate through the system safely. The humans have had to establish traffic control systems just to manage their own fleet movements. Zexhai rubbed his temples with 2 of his 4 hands. This was getting out of control. Contact Admiral Chen immediately. We need an explanation. I've been trying for 3 days, sir. She's been too busy to respond. Something about coordinating humanitarian operations. Then we're going there ourselves, Zexhai decided. Prepare my ship, and send messages to the other cooperative representatives. They need to see this. 2 days later, the Galactic Cooperative vessel Diplomatic Unity dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442b system. Immediately, Zexhai's sensors lit up with contact signatures. The reports hadn't been exaggerated. If anything, they had understated the situation. Computer, Zexhai said slowly, how many ships are currently in this system? Scanning. 643 vessels detected. Composition: agricultural processing ships, research vessels, medical frigates, engineering platforms, orbital construction units, and defensive installations. Defensive installations? Confirmed. 12 orbital weapons platforms, each equipped with capital ship-grade weaponry and shield systems. Zexhai's pilot, a nervous Andromedan named Veltar, looked back from the navigation console. Sir, we're being hailed by human traffic control. They want to assign us a flight path to avoid collision with ongoing operations. Traffic control? They've established a comprehensive space traffic management system for the entire solar system. There are currently 87 ships in active flight patterns around the 4th planet alone. Before Zexhai could respond, Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main communication screen. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had been working hard on an important project. Ambassador Zexhai, she said warmly. Welcome to Kepler 442b. I apologize for not responding to your messages sooner. We've been a bit busy getting things organized. Admiral, Zexhai said carefully, perhaps you could explain what exactly you're organizing here. Standard humanitarian aid operations, Chen replied. We should have the crisis resolved within the next few weeks. Would you like a tour? I think you'd find our progress interesting. Against his better judgment, Zexhai agreed. An hour later, he found himself aboard a human shuttle, descending toward the surface of Kepler 442b with Admiral Chen as his guide. What he saw through the viewport defied everything he thought he knew about disaster relief. The planet's surface was covered with human activity. Massive atmospheric processors worked to clean the air of plague spores. Mobile laboratories the size of small cities conducted research across the landscape. Teams of engineers in environmental suits were planting new crops that seemed to be growing at impossible speeds. How are the plants growing so fast? Zexhai asked. Genetic acceleration, Chen explained casually. Dr. Okafor's team modified the growth cycles so we can test multiple generations quickly. We're making sure the new crops are completely immune to bioweapons while also improving their nutritional content. You modified their genetic structure? With permission, of course. The Verdani were very cooperative once we explained the benefits. Their new crops will produce 3 times as much food with half the water requirements. The shuttle landed near one of the research facilities, where Dr. Okafor met them personally. The xenobiologist looked excited as he led them through the laboratory complex. Ambassador, he said enthusiastically, you have to see what we've discovered. This plague is fascinating from a scientific perspective. It's definitely a weapon, probably created by the extinct hegemony species about 2,000 years ago. The hegemony? Zexhai asked. But they've been gone for centuries. Exactly. This is leftover biological warfare, probably triggered by some environmental change. But here's the interesting part. We found traces of the original antidote in the planetary soil. The hegemony created a cure but never deployed it. Dr. Okafor led them to a massive computer display showing molecular structures. We've not only recreated their antidote but improved it. The Verdani will be completely immune to biological weapons from now on. Plus, we've enhanced their immune systems to handle diseases that don't even exist yet. Enhance their immune systems? Zexhai repeated weakly. Standard procedure, Dr. Okafor said. When we're solving a medical problem, we like to make sure it can never happen again. The Verdani will be the healthiest species in the galaxy when we're done. Admiral Chen took Zexhai to see the orbital installations next. As their shuttle approached the nearest platform, Zexhai realized he was looking at something larger than most space stations. The structure stretched for kilometers in every direction, covered with agricultural domes, research facilities, and what appeared to be residential areas. Admiral, he said slowly, this looks like a permanent installation. Oh, it is, Chen confirmed. These platforms are designed to support the entire Verdani population if necessary. Each one can house about 1 million people indefinitely. The entire population? But why would they need to evacuate their planet? Chen looked at him with surprise. Backup plan, of course. What if their sun goes unstable? What if there's another bioweapon attack? What if someone decides to invade? We can't just solve today's problem and ignore tomorrow's potential disasters. So you built evacuation shelters for problems that don't exist? Problems that don't exist yet, Chen corrected. On Earth, we learned that if something can go wrong, it eventually will. Better to be prepared. The tour continued to the outer planets where human engineering teams were constructing what appeared to be a complete industrial infrastructure. Mining operations, manufacturing facilities, and research stations spread across 3 different worlds. What are you mining? Zexhai asked. Raw materials for the terraforming operations, replied Commander Park, Chen's tactical officer. We need a lot of resources to clean up those dead continents. Plus, we're building redundant food production facilities on each world in the system. Redundant facilities? Backup for the backup, Park explained. If something happens to the primary agricultural systems, the secondary systems can take over. If something happens to those, the tertiary systems activate. We've got 7 levels of redundancy built into their food security network. By the end of the day, Zexhai felt overwhelmed by the scope of human operations. They had essentially rebuilt the entire Kepler 442b system from scratch, turning it into the most advanced and secure agricultural center in the galaxy, all to solve what other species considered a simple crop disease. That evening, Admiral Chen invited him to dinner aboard the Abundance. As they ate, Zexhai finally asked the question that had been bothering him all day. Admiral, he said, why did you do all this? The Galactic Cooperative would have sent adequate aid. 3 ships, basic supplies, standard research team. It would have been sufficient to help the Verdani survive until they found their own solution. Chen was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Ambassador, let me ask you something. If your homeworld was dying, would you want someone to send you just enough help to survive? Or would you want them to make sure the problem never happened again? I would want to survive, of course. But what about your children? Your children's children? What happens when the next crisis comes and the next one after that? Do you just keep hoping someone will send enough help each time? Zexhai began to understand. You're not just solving the immediate problem. Exactly. We're solving the Verdani's food security permanently. Their agricultural systems can now handle any biological attack. environmental disaster, or population growth. They'll never need to ask for help with food again. But the cost must be enormous. Chen shrugged. Money isn't important when people are dying. Besides, this helps everyone. The Verdani will become the primary food exporters for this entire sector. Other species will benefit from the surplus production and the medical research we've conducted. And the defensive installations? The Verdani are now under human protection, Chen said simply. Anyone who wants to hurt them will have to go through us first. Zexai stared at her. You've essentially adopted an entire species. I suppose we have, Chen said with a smile. That's what neighbors do, right? Look out for each other. The next morning, Zexai met with Elder Krista in the newly constructed Verdani Capitol building. The plant-like leader seemed healthier and more vibrant than before. Thanks to the human M 6 months after the human fleet arrived at Kepler 442b, the Galactic Cooperative Council gathered for their most important meeting in centuries. The Great Hall buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages as representatives from across the galaxy took their seats. Today they would vote on something that had never been considered before: a complete restructuring of humanitarian aid protocols. Ambassador Zexai stood at the central podium, looking out at the assembled delegates. In the month since visiting Kepler 442b, he had struggled to write reports that accurately described what he had witnessed. How do you explain to species that think in terms of efficiency and minimal cost that some problems require overwhelming solutions? Friends, he began. 6 months ago, we responded to a crisis on Kepler 442b according to established protocols. We planned to send 3 ships with basic aid. Today, I want to discuss what actually happened and what we can learn from it. The holographic display activated, showing recent images from the Kepler system. Instead of the dying agricultural world they remembered, the display showed a thriving system with multiple inhabited planets, massive orbital installations, and shipping lanes busy with trade vessels. The Verdani system has become the most prosperous agricultural center in this sector, Zexai continued. They're now exporting food to 12 different species and have offered to serve as an emergency food reserve for this entire region of the galaxy. Delegate Mordak from the Centauri Collective raised one of his 4 arms. Ambassador, while we're pleased the Verdani survived, the human response was clearly excessive. They deployed military-level resources for a simple crop disease. Was it excessive? Zexai asked. Let me share some data. New images appeared on the display, before and after comparisons of Verdani society. Malnutrition rates, disease statistics, agricultural output, and population growth projections. Before human intervention, the Verdani faced extinction within 6 months. Today they have food security for the next 1,000 years. Their population health has improved by every measurable standard. They've gone from a dying species to one of the most secure civilizations in the galaxy. The Andromedan delegate Velsina leaned forward. But at what cost? The resources the humans expended could have helped dozens of other species with smaller problems. Actually, Zexai said, the humans have documented their expenses. The total cost of Operation Lifeline was less than what the Galactic Cooperative spends on administrative overhead in a typical year. The hall fell silent. Delegate after delegate checked their data pads, confirming the numbers. The human operation, despite its massive scope, had been incredibly cost-effective. How is that possible? Asked the Vegan representative. Efficiency, Zexai explained. When you deploy overwhelming resources quickly, you solve problems permanently rather than treating symptoms repeatedly. The humans call it front-loading the solution. He activated another display showing human industrial capacity. It turns out that when your species evolved on a death world, you develop industrial capabilities that most of us can't imagine. The humans can build in 6 months what takes us 6 years, and they can do it while maintaining higher quality standards. Elder Krista had been invited to address the council, and now she took the stage. The Verdani leader looked vibrant and healthy, her plant-like features showing none of the stress and sickness that had marked her 6 months earlier. Honored delegates, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. I come before you not just as a representative of my people, but as someone who has experienced 2 different approaches to humanitarian aid. She gestured to the display, which now showed the modest aid package the Galactic Cooperative had originally planned. Your response would have helped us survive. 3 ships, basic supplies, a small research team. We would have struggled through the crisis, lost perhaps half our population, and spent decades recovering. We would have been grateful for your help. The display changed to show the current state of Verdani space. The human response didn't just help us survive, it eliminated the possibility that we would ever face such a crisis again. Our children will never know hunger. Our species will never again be vulnerable to biological weapons. We've gone from victims to protectors, offering aid to others who face similar problems. Delegate Mordak stood up. Elder Krista, with respect, the human approach requires resources that most species cannot provide. We cannot all build orbital cities every time someone has a problem. You're right, Elder Krista agreed. Most species cannot do what humans do. But perhaps we've been thinking about this wrong. Perhaps the question isn't whether everyone can respond like humans, but whether we should learn from their approach. Ambassador Zexhai retook the podium, which brings us to today's proposal. I've spent the last 6 months studying human humanitarian protocols, and I believe we need to fundamentally change how we think about aid operations. The display showed a new document titled The Human Standard for Humanitarian Operations. The council members read through the principles in stunned silence. Overwhelming initial response rather than minimal aid. Permanent solution implementation rather than temporary relief. Infrastructure building rather than supply distribution. Long-term security planning rather than crisis-specific intervention. This is madness, declared the Syrian delegate. These protocols would bankrupt most planetary governments. Actually, said a new voice from the gallery, they would save money in the long run. Admiral Chen walked down to the main floor. Having been invited to explain the human perspective, she looked the same as always, professional, calm, and slightly amused by the diplomatic complexity of what she considered simple problems. Delegates, she said, I understand your concerns about cost and resources. Let me share some data from our own experience. She activated her own display, showing human crisis response statistics over the past century. 50 years ago, humans responded to crises the way you do now. Minimal aid, temporary solutions, repeated interventions. We discovered that this approach was actually more expensive than overwhelming initial responses. The data showed cost comparisons between different response strategies. The results were clear. Front-loading solutions saved money, lives, and resources in the long term. Take the Verdani situation, Chen continued. If we had followed standard protocols, we would have spent the next 50 years sending repeated aid shipments every time they faced agricultural problems. The total cost over 50 years would have been 3 times what we spent in 6 months. Delegate Velsina raised her hand. Admiral, your approach requires industrial capabilities that most species lack. How do you propose we implement these protocols? Chen smiled. That's the beauty of the system. Once you solve a problem correctly the first time, the beneficiary becomes part of the solution network. The Verdani are now equipped to help other species facing agricultural crises. Each successful intervention creates new capacity for future operations. You're building a mutual aid network, Zexhai realized. Exactly. Instead of everyone struggling with individual problems, we create a galaxy, where each species contributes their strengths to help others. The Verdani handle agricultural crises. The Aquatic Alliance helps with water world problems. The Crystal Confederation assists with mineral resource issues. The debate continued for hours, but gradually, the mood in the chamber shifted. Delegates began asking practical questions instead of raising objections. How would coordination work? What about species that couldn't contribute significant resources? How would they handle conflicts between different aid approaches? The humans have offered to serve as the initial coordination hub, Zexhai explained. They have the industrial capacity to handle large-scale operations while other species develop their own capabilities. And they want nothing in return? Asked the suspicious Rigelian delegate. Admiral Chen stood up again. We want what we've always wanted. A galaxy where people help each other when help is needed, where no species faces extinction because they happen to encounter a problem bigger than they could handle alone. The vote, when it came, was closer than Zexhai had expected. 57 species voted in favor of adopting the human standard for humanitarian operations. 32 voted against, preferring traditional approaches. 15 abstained, wanting to see results before committing. But it was enough. The Galactic Cooperative would begin implementing new protocols based on human methods. Crisis response teams would be equipped for permanent solutions rather than temporary relief. Resources would be pre-positioned for rapid deployment. Most importantly, successful interventions would be designed to create new capabilities rather than just solve immediate problems. 6 months later, Admiral Chen received a priority communication from the Outer Rim. The insectoid Zephyrians were facing extinction from solar flares that would sterilize their homeworld within the year. The Galactic Cooperative was requesting human assistance under the new protocols. Chen stood in her ready room aboard,